Sitting down for this conversation was exciting me all day. So welcome to the Petey Performance podcast. Can't wait to get into it. How are you getting on this morning? Because your day is just starting over there, I assume.
Yes, it is. I am here in Boston. I'm delighted to be here, Peter. Delighted to be here. And I've listened to your podcast and really, really like it. Love your journalistic style and the homework you do on your interviewees. So I'm very excited.
I try and steer clear of the word interview or interviewees most of the time, I think, because in the past, it has kind of led to more so the athletes that come on sometimes give me the rote answers. So I hope you treat this as a conversation, and I'll treat it as a conversation.
I will.
And I won't print it in the press. I really appreciate your kind words, but I'm not quite at the journalistic standard yet to be writing in the Irish Times. So don't worry, we won't take anything that you say and use it out of context. But how are you, mate? How's Boston this morning?
Good. It's a beautiful day in Boston. I think it's going to be probably 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Not sure what that is in Celsius, but we've just recently moved into a new place and we've done a lot of traveling around Costa Rica, Mexico whilst working online. And we were told this place was move-in ready to go. I had my standing desk already. I thought I was going to be straight into my work, and I'm not even joking. It was basically a construction site. So it's been stressful, but it's coming together now, and I'm just looking forward to having a base here in Boston.
A lot of your work, I would imagine, is done in a remote setting anyway. So why was it that you picked Boston? Was it because that's where you were born? That's where you grew up? Is you're returning to your roots, I suppose, in a sense?
Yeah. So I was actually born in Boston. I have a pretty crazy story, to be honest. I was born in Boston, and I think when I was 3 months old, so my dad's purely Irish, 100% Irish, no connection to America. And my mother was born in New York. So they met over here. That, my dad traveled over here for work and they met. But when I was born, my dad sailed back to Ireland in a sailboat and my mom brought me in a plane. And so from 3 months old, I spent the rest of my, primary school life in Ireland. Then we did a bit of traveling, ended up back in the States, back in Ireland for, secondary school, just over and back. But I came over to Boston every summer to work, and it always just felt like home. I play basketball. I love the Boston Celtics here, but it just always felt like home. So there's a lot of angry drivers. It's pretty crazy, like traffic, and it's the stereotype is true. There's a bunch of Irish people over here, Irish Americans, and we're very rough around the edges compared to the rest of the States, but I do love it here. Yeah.
I think you've done pretty well to have as middle an accent as you have.
I get it all the time. I literally get this all the time.
Like, I would imagine that, like, you have an Irish accent, but I would imagine, like, it has a touch of American in it. But is it a double take for people in the States? They're like...
Every single time. I'll just get this, right? I thought, are you Irish? And then it's just like, they don't even ask it straight out, but then it comes up and then they're like, oh my God, I knew I heard something. But it comes from me studying abroad and having to clear up my language because I couldn't say like tree and things like that. People would just constantly be like, what you say? And so I just had to be more articulate, I guess.
Okay, well, it obviously helps with your communication style, and that's obviously a huge part of the job. And a big benefit to having that green card is now you're over in the States and you're working with a huge organization in Team Biolayne. And I saw you had your little team bonding meet and greet there recently. So maybe it did suit in terms of timing because the apartment was a construction site, as you said.
For sure. No, absolutely. I was pretty run ragged in terms of traveling, but it was an amazing trip. The whole team, I couldn't believe how like open and welcoming they were. Layne himself was just down to earth. Holly, his wife, who's obviously a big name herself, very down to earth. It didn't feel like you were sitting next to, these massive personalities that I followed for 10 years, but there's a new member on the team as well who came in pretty much the same time as me as a coach. His name is Coach Bernardo. He's from Ecuador, and he's the nicest man you'll ever meet. But the whole weekend, he couldn't believe it, because Layne was the reason he started lifting, he started coaching, he's a nutrition mind. Like everything he's done with his entire career is because of Layne. And we're sitting there across the table watching this man eat lunch, you know. So it was definitely really, really fun.
And I would imagine as well that there wasn't as much conversation around nutrition as people would imagine. There was probably very, very little.
Very little. Very little. Which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And in order to connect with these people that vast majority are from the States, or even if they're from elsewhere like South America, obviously you being a Boston Celtics fan, do you use the basketball to connect quite a lot with people? Because the NBA is such a huge organization and we're in such close proximity to the finals. It's such an easy talking point. Sorry to bring it up, by the way.
Yeah, that was tough. Oh man. Anyway, yes, I try to, but it's so for example, in the Team Biolayne circle, sports they're not a huge like interest area. A lot of these, you know, they're just like, they're really into powerlifting, into competing in terms of bodybuilding, and they're very accomplished in that area, you know. I remember I was talking about it at one point. There was definitely a couple of coaches who were interested in that. And one of the coaches was like, you really love sports, don't you? And then I was like, oh, I don't want to come across as this big meathead or something, this jock meathead, but I do use it normally, because if you think about it, Peter, it's like GAA back in Ireland. It's the language. Like it's kids are going to elementary school and they're all playing basketball. Everybody has a base level of basketball skill, which is crazy, because you go to Ireland and it's like, you know, it's comical sometimes, but it is nice. It is nice to be able to just talk about, you know, I turn on the radio in the morning in the car and there's Celtics radio, and that's a new experience for sure.
Well, you're in the right place, Boston being a sporting city for sure. Like it's constant sports, and the way that seasons line up, there's no break, there's no reprieve from it, which definitely suits you, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So being in this new spot, in this new role, what's exciting you the most about doing this? Because there's probably new aspects to it, but it's not entirely new. It's what you've been doing for a long time, and you're going to be employing the principles that you've been using for the last many, many years, I suppose. But at the same time, there must be something daunting about it too.
For sure. So basically, I came on board as a sports performance and nutrition coach, right? So a sports and performance nutrition coach. So and that's really the first coach in Team Biolayne that's doing that. So until now, they've been working with a large, you know, the general population, helping them to achieve body composition, fat loss, muscle gain, or health goals, or competing bodybuilders, power lifters, you know, Olympic lifters. That's kind of their net. And so they were really excited to have someone who's going to target endurance athletes, team sport athletes, field sport athletes, and just kind of bring that whole clientele and you know, the Instagram posts and things like that, just attracting a whole new audience. So I'm really excited to do that. And then in terms of the daunting side of it, I mean, so like you have Layne and Holly, these experts in nutrition. You just have to be, everything you put out there has to just be, and I was already like that. I worked with Daniel Davey for a whole year, and I know you've had Daniel on the podcast, and Daniel's next level as well. Like he never wants to say anything that, and I've always operated like that, but it's just a new level of having to make sure every word is
on point.
Is on point, and it's a great challenge. Sometimes it causes a little more anxiety than it should, I suppose, but the positives largely outweigh the negatives, you know?
Yeah. Do you have a process around going through what you've written with a fine-tooth comb? Do you go through it a certain number of times? Do you send it to somebody to review before you put it out there? Or is it very much down to your mood at the time?
It's down. So in terms of posting it, in terms of my like writing, I do actually make more typos than I'm proud to admit, but the actual evidence and the references are never like, I'm always very happy with that because I will double check that. Some days I will literally spend 6 hours on a carousel that I put up, the carousels where you swipe across. Some days I'll spend 2 days on those where I'll finish it over a period of a couple hours. And I'm just like, no, I'm not sure if that's actually factual or 100%, if something's exploratory in the research. Let's say if it's a collagen post and collagen has, just a couple of studies out there, I need to go back. So I'll just leave it for the day and go back. So sometimes I have a lull on social media where it's a couple of days where I don't post. That's just because I'm making sure everything is to the T. And I think I'd rather just have one post every day or two rather than 3 posts every day. And sometimes it's hit or miss. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've done that with the carousels as well. I haven't posted any in a while because they do take a little bit longer to put together, because I think for both of us, as you touched on earlier, we are quite decent level, above average communicators verbally probably, but in a written sense, we may have to think about it a little bit more, because you're constantly thinking about not how does this read for me, but how does this read for somebody else? So you've got to constantly refine it. And what you touched on about Daniel there, like, language is so important. So important. You could spend 10 minutes on one word. Does this word suit this sentence better than this one?
Does this alienate people? Does this bring them in?
Exactly. And people don't think about that, I suppose, when they're creating content. So from your perspective then, when you're putting this content out there and now you're going into this niche of sports performance nutrition, which I'm sure it sounds like you're very excited about, do you try to see it through the lens of an athlete when you're writing this content? Which is easy Absolutely. For you, given that you are an athlete and you have been an athlete at a fairly high level before.
Yeah, absolutely. Try my best to. And I think as a general rule of thumb, from what I've seen, athletes, whilst they are a bit more motivated towards their nutrition and their recovery practices, they generally have a bit less time, because it is the training and the actual performance that's the key. A lot of them are working, especially in Ireland, even if you're playing at the top level, GAA, hurling, football, you still have a full-time job outside of that. So for me, a big thing is just, it's something I go back to constantly, is just controlling what you can, and just giving you really simple things, simple strategies that are they're so easy that it's almost hard not to do them. And in that sense, I really do try to dumb it down that much more for these athletes.
Do you find yourself using different language and different analogies with the athletes as opposed to when you're working with general population clients? As I can imagine, you're still working with some general population clients, as we all do as well. Like, there are clear benefits to working with both athletic populations and those in the general population.
For sure. And just before I kind of share some of these things I share with them, I think a lot of people classify themselves as Gen Pop, non-athletes, when if you look at their training, some people are training every day. Some people are training 6 days a week, and it's fairly intense training. And I'm saying, okay, well, you're not an athlete on a team. You're not competing for, a country or national team, but fuck, you're an athlete, like, So that's something that I tried to kind of get through to people. And, a lot of them come to me and improving their performance in the gym or performance running or something like that is their goal. So in that sense, they are an athlete.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I definitely work with, a lot of Gen Pop as well. I'm sorry about the planes passing. I'm not sure if that's...
Can't hear anything. Your mic, as I said to you off air, is fantastic.
That's brilliant, because that's blasting outside right now. That's brilliant. So some of the things I like to say, and these aren't at all original, these are things I get from other people in this area. First off is fuel for the work required. And that's something that is, quoted from Laurent Bannock, who is the director of the Institute of Performance Nutrition. And it's just about stop following a static number You know, as an athlete, each day is absolutely going to be different. You know, when I'm giving my workshops, and I'm sure we'll touch on that a small bit, I'm talking to these athletes or these tactical athletes, and I'm saying, today, guys, you're sitting on your ass listening to me all day. And the other specialists, you need very different fuel requirements than tomorrow when you have your drills. You know, some of them are National Guard, right, where they have a whole day of then drills.
Yeah.
Physical drills and conditioning drills. I'm like, why would you work to one static number? Why would you think that your nutrition should be the same? So fueling for the work required, and that goes both ways. You don't need to overfuel on the days where, you know, you're not doing as much. And it really just has to come down to that. Just, you know, that can be a really great first step for people. Instead of diving into the nuance of nutrition, you know, just differentiate between your days, and then have a few strategies for like your higher activity days and your lower activity days.
Pat, on that, what is the easiest way for people to do that? Is it to sit down and plan the week, and then, as you said, have maybe 2 typical days that you will have, a low activity and a high activity, or maybe some people will have a moderate activity level day as well? What is the easiest way and most accessible way that people can manage that?
Absolutely. So you won't believe it. I'm putting together a post on this, but there's this concept called the athlete's plate or performance plates. And it's really, really big. It's used in all professional sports, and it was created by the International Olympic Committee in conjunction with another university out here. I'm not sure who it was, but basically what they do is they tell you to categorize your week into 3 different types of day, just like you said: easy, moderate, intense. Now, it's not just about the specific 1 hour of training you did, because we know that the other 23 hours are important too. An easy day is a largely sedentary day. Yeah, you might have gone out for a walk with the dog. You might have done maybe a prehab session or a light resistance training session. But we know there, like, fuel isn't necessary. You don't need to change up your intake. So, you know, protein, veggies, healthy fats, and yeah, some carbohydrates, but that doesn't have to be the priority. And then your moderate would be a more intense resistance training session. You hit your 10,000, maybe you went to 12,000, 13,000 steps. You moved around for a large portion of the day, and that's your kind of moderate. Maybe you went for a run for maybe 5K, lower intensity. That's when carbohydrates are starting to creep up and you need a bit more of them. Protein, same. Veggies, yeah, you just kind of balance it out on the plate. And this is a resource online, by the way. If you get, you know, whoever's listening, if you type in the athlete's plate, and I'm sure you can link this, Peter, on Google, you'll find there's a bunch of different photos, but go to the International Olympic Committee one, and they'll actually show you these infographics of what your plate should look like on these days. And then on the intense day, it's going to be like half the plate is going to be your carbohydrates, your starches, your grains. Veggies are going to be smaller, less portion of fat, and then protein is going to be about a quarter of the plate. And that's really just a really great step for people. If they don't know where to start, just categorize your days.
It has many parallels as well to, obviously I'm not on the nutrition side of it, but I try to categorize days in terms of training load. So we have our high days, our low days, and we try to keep as little moderate activity days as possible. Now, the difference in what I do, I would say, is our low days are probably moderate days.
Okay.
Of nutrition, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what we would classify as what you are saying is a low day, we would just call it a rest day.
Gotcha.
So that's the only difference. But like, it's like, obviously, as you said, you're not an athlete for 1 hour of the day, you're an athlete for 24 hours of the day. So it doesn't just matter what you're doing in the gym or on the track or on the pitch or the court with me. You've also got to cover what you're doing outside of it. So for many, many athletes, more so than we would imagine, I'd say, and like to imagine, they will stress over what they're doing in training, but unfortunately, they won't think about what they're doing away from wherever they are training. And probably aside from your recovery, your sleep, like, nutrition has got to be one of your big pillars of health and performance there. So what are some of the other things that you speak to athletes about to get that buy-in from them? Now, I know that that might be different for you, because typically those that come to you they are seeking that information. They've already made a commitment to improve. But I'm sure you've worked with people that have been a little bit reluctant. They're just like, oh, I don't have the time. I'm not that interested. I'm doing okay as it is. What are your what do you use? Like, how do you get them on board?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot of athletes have yet to see the difference between getting by and getting away with and thriving. So with nutrition, it's very, okay, it's not exploratory anymore, but it's definitely become, you know, an area of increased interest and intrigue. But a lot of athletes who have good genetics and train all the time, you know, you hear from them, hey, I can eat pretty much what I want. It's like, you can absolutely do that, because in their mind, they're talking about body composition. I don't put on any weight. But like, I've beaten many skinny, trim, lean athletes in suicide runs in basketball, many, right? And it's not about just your body composition. We're talking about athletic performance. There's so much potential being left on the table if you're not looking at your nutrition. And that's just in terms of just like replenishing your energy sources, making sure you're coming in with topped up energy sources. That's huge. Recovering afterwards, because now we're seeing recovery, like inadequate recovery. You hear athletes say, I'll be a bit sore in the morning. It's like, no, your session tomorrow and the next day will actually suffer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just things like I could go on and on about that, but I think that getting by or getting away with is very different than thriving. And just quickly on that, the reason I got into nutrition was I was studying sports science in UL, and I was playing basketball, Super League at the time. It was my first year, and one of my best friends was on the team. Now, he won't mind me saying he wasn't much of a basketballer. He's 6'8". His name is Colin Doherty, and he's over doing a PhD in Australia right now. But this guy is 6'8". He wasn't exactly skinny, but he would demolish everyone in the suicides. So the suicides, you know what the suicides
I know what
are,
suicides
right?
are. Yeah.
I'm sure everyone else.
Everybody's seen Coach Carter.
Coach Carter, yeah. So he would just kill everybody, and I'm sitting down next to him dead, and I'm like, Colin, what the hell? And he's like, I just eat my veggies, I just eat right, and But at that time I was associating like leanness, being trim, looking athletic to performance. And I think that's something we have to kind of, it does obviously relate, being at an ideal body weight, but there's so much more factors.
To an extent. Yeah. I actually had this conversation with Dan as well, Daniel. And I think we are moving away from it. Obviously, there is an ideal, there is a desired kind of athlete profile that the best athletes typically have in that sport. But equally, every athlete has something that stands them out, and every athlete plays the game in a different way or performs the sport in a different way. So to say that, who can I use as an example? Cristiano Ronaldo has the ideal body for football probably isn't true, because if you threw him in goal or you threw him in centre back, he probably wouldn't be the best goalkeeper or the best centre back in the world, even though he's definitely the best number 9 or striker. So it depends on how you play the game. It depends on the position you play in. It depends on the environment that you play in, because we may use, maybe Cristiano is probably the worst person to use because he will fit into both teams because he's so good.
Yeah.
But if you talk about, let's bring it to basketball, and we talk about Tony Kukoc. When he was playing in Europe, he had a distinct style, and when he transferred over to the States in his first year, the style didn't work. Initially, he had to adapt his body, he had to adapt his play to play in the NBA, because the styles played in those two leagues are very different. And that applies to athletes all over the place. Like if you are playing with the Dublin GAA team, you will have to perform different demands, even though they'll be close to demands, but different outputs than you would if you were playing with Armagh. Because the two teams play a different style. And that's, from a strength and conditioning perspective, that's a very important question to ask the coach when you go in. How do we want to play? And it probably applies as well to nutrition too, because what an athlete is ingesting, as you said, it's not just broadcast general statements, it's individual. Mm-hmm. So what one team will go through in a training week will be very different to what another team will go through in a training week. So therefore, carbohydrate might be more important for one team, whereas protein sources might be more important for another team if they're doing more strength work. And even the ratio of fats to carbs might be different based on the individual, how they react to those fuel sources, and what's their preferred option. And that's something that's not really talked about, I suppose. But now we are getting into the nuances, aren't we?
No, but I think you're so right. And look, like, so I'm obviously with Layne now, and he's someone that is in the field, and he's always tackling people who push out misinformation. But as evidence-informed, like, nutritionists, we're not necessarily condemning certain approaches. Mm-hmm. It's when people push these approaches as the one way. Individuality in nutrition is literally the area of most focus right now. Some people have different microbiota, like the diversity in their microbiota. They actually require different things. Some people process sugar intake of sugar differently. You know, some people it affects their blood sugar a lot more, kind of, it's not as much of an effect or impact. And then others it is. So they have to watch their carbohydrate intake. There's so much diversity. So when I see information kind of like this tribalism, it's not that I necessarily think it's incorrect. It's that I can instantly think of 10 cases where that isn't the ideal approach. Yeah. So I think you bring up an amazing point, that it's about what suits you. It's about what suits you in your approach, but also what you need. Like what you need. But before we move on, I really want to highlight. So I'm not sure if you've had Evan Lynch on. Have you ever had?
I haven't had Evan on. No, would love to.
You should have him on. He's great. And he'd love to. He always does podcasts. So he makes this really good point that if you're 2 to 3% overweight, let's say, for your sport, okay, and it's, 2 to 3% is really not that much. Okay, so you're carrying an extra couple of pounds, and you're coming into the start of your season. The sacrifices you'll make in your intake, in your mood, in your energy levels, and your performance, he argues, and I agree, would be a lot more than the benefit you stand to gain from reaching that ideal body comp. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't pursue that in the off season. And Daniel, he always talks himself about development phases when you're in the pure off season, which we know doesn't really exist in the GAA, right? Yeah. If you're any bit good,
hopefully this year.
So yeah. So that's really important to understand too. It's, you know what I mean? Like, are you actually standing to gain something here, or can you give up that 1 to 2% in performance and not take all that sacrifice on?
Absolutely. There's countless examples. Like, I'm just thinking like Ronaldinho and the original Ronaldo, like they were always carrying a little bit more timber, but like they're Ronaldinho and Ronaldo, like let them carry a little bit more timber, let them be happy, play with a bit of joy and have good mood. And then hopefully the team will improve as a result. Like, so there is an ideal body type if you generalize, like, or like an ideal body composition for different sports, but like knowing that that's a bandwidth and that it's desired.
Brilliance.
It's desired. It's not like the one optimal and only option is very important. Like,
absolutely.
Because athletes can get very, very stressed chasing that optimal, whatever optimal is. Like, God.
No, you're absolutely right. And genetics plays a huge role there.
Huge.
Yeah.
And like, that is a big one. Like, it is a huge one with athletes. It's always body recomposition and weight loss. And I know it's a big topic and it is important, but it's probably overemphasized at times too, is it?
It is.
You're more in the know than me.
No, absolutely. It is. But if you play, which you do, you know that it is overemphasized. And that's coming from sports coaches who they haven't studied this area and they haven't ever like assessed the true relationship between a couple of extra pounds and ideal performance, and that it's not necessarily as important as they might think. There's a lot of factors there with uninformed sports coaches, but Now, what I'll say is like, all right, you sound like you have a fairly good knowledge of the NBA. We'll talk about Luka Doncic. You know Luka
Yeah,
Doncic?
I do. Yeah.
So we call him the dad bod, right? And the dad bod is from Europe, and he's absolutely killing people out there in the NBA. He literally says it's easier to score in the NBA. Now, with that said, if you saw him in the Eastern Conference Finals this year, or the Western Conference Finals, apologies, you saw that the reason they lost was because he was so fatigued and could not get back down the court. And that's where you say, okay, we definitely need to improve his fitness and his conditioning, because it's affecting his team. But that's the other side of the equation, where it's clearly an issue, and he's carrying a lot more weight. He's prone to a lot more injuries.
Because
he doesn't have yeah.
Because he's carrying excess weight, obviously, so that leads to more force, because mass times acceleration equals force.
Exactly.
So it's more force going through his joints, and as well as that, he's carrying probably a little bit too much, as you said, or more than the average excess weight. So body fat percentage,
and that's where you tackle that. But if it's a small 1% to 2% that it hasn't been flagged as something that's limiting your performance, focus on the performance strategies, the fueling, the recovery, the sleep, the hydration. And usually that will take care of itself. And if it doesn't, that's where you go to someone, a professional, and you get help in the development phase, in the time where you're not in season, where performance is the key objective. So I always say, now there's caveats. If performance is the goal, body comp shouldn't be. And then when body comp is the goal, performance shouldn't be, because it's tough to chase both of them. It's almost impossible to optimize both of them at the same time.
It's definitely like, if you if you chase two hares, you catch neither. So like,
exactly. Oh, I love that.
You've got to decide what is the time to do what, I suppose, and what is the time to focus on what. And as well as that, like we're saying there, he could attest to dropping a little bit of body fat. But at the same time, if he's not fit for purpose or built for purpose, and he loses a little bit of muscle mass along with the weight, which he'll lose a tiny bit, is that going to lead to a little bit less quickness at that period of time? A little bit of lack of strength, a little bit of under fueling for the demand, so that he's going into worse conditioning for a time period before he gets back to better, I suppose. So like, obviously within the season, that's not the time to do it. And the tough thing about the NBA, as well as the GAA, is, as we just touched on, they're training in the off season, a lot of them as well. So it can be quite hard to pick those windows of opportunity. And for Irish athletes especially, they'd be questioning, when am I going to go have 10 pints of Guinness? Like, when am I going to go on the tear if I'm focused on losing body weight or body fat in my off season, which is going to be for them November, December, when obviously in Ireland, a lot of people do an abnormal amount of socializing to what they would during the rest of the year.
Yeah. And to your point, that's actually why they thought Luka was not in shape. It wasn't that he was overeating or anything like that. It was the actual booze. He's Slovenian, you know what I mean? Yeah. So they might be like us in that regard. Yeah.
Absolutely. And like, it only occurs when you ask people to maybe track their alcohol that they realize the calories in alcohol. And they're like, holy God, I'm going to limit my alcohol consumption. Well, most people in other parts of the world would limit it anyway, but that's what typically gets through to the Irish people is, wow, if I want to achieve my goals, maybe it's not going to help me to get there, but I can obviously afford to go out and enjoy myself every once in a while too. But like, in order to change and shift this mindset of the sports coaches, what do you think is, like, what is it that we have to do? Is it education of the actual coaches as opposed to the athletes? Or is it education of both, maybe?
That's the $1 million question, I think. I don't think the resources are there currently to have a professional working with every team. But this kind of misinformation is occurring at every level. That's the problem. You know what I mean? Like, I remember my younger days in sports. Like, I remember coming home from a team gym session thinking I had to eat 3 chicken breasts, like, as a 16-year-old kid. Like, so whilst the resources aren't there for every small club team to have a nutritionist working with them, while that's not there, the resources, that misinformation is being pushed through at every level. And then that carries, like, athletics is a major area of worry, because so many sports and events are weight dependent, and coaches make remarks that really dig deep with younger, because you're looking at your coach as your role model. Like, I remember looking at my coaches as it's almost like a third parent for some, and it's whatever comes out of their mouth carries so much more weight. So I think,
excuse the pun.
You're good at the pun spotting. So you sent me the show notes over, right?
Yeah.
Or just the kind of areas you're going to hit. And you said, excuse the pun. And I swear I had to reread the thing. And I was like, where the fuck is the pun?
Yeah.
But I found it.
how people digest information it was.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry for breaking your flow.
No. So I was just saying that it should be, maybe they don't need to go and get a nutrition education. It should just be learning to work within their scope. And I think that's really important. And I feel like a lot of coaching courses would give that, like specific coaching courses give that. Ultimately, it really comes down to education. It really comes down to just a base level of education, maybe doing an online course, precision nutrition, something like that. If you are really invested in just being able to give accurate, scientific, informed advice. But again, that's not something I recommend to a club under 16 football coach. It's just learning to operate within your scope. You know what I mean?
And do you believe then that the best aspect of performance nutrition, or what maybe Daniel is doing, or David Dunn, or Evan, or any of these people are doing, and the way that they can have the biggest impact in probably Ireland, is clubs could reach out to these people, even if they can't afford to get them in full-time, get them in on a consultancy basis and get them in teaching principles, teaching skills, and working on habits on even, like, I don't know, a bi-monthly basis, or once every 3 months, even quarterly, I suppose, because that's going to be cheaper for the club. And obviously, as we said, there are financial barriers to getting nutritionists in.
You'd be shocked at the amount you'd learn in one of these workshops with either Daniel, Evan. They both do those with a lot of sports clubs around Ireland. I do them with a lot. You'd be shocked at the amount you can learn in one session. Like you said, it could be once every 3 months. It's just about having someone else come in and give that instruction, and you washing your hands of it and focusing on where your specialty lies in the actual sports coaching. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I absolutely recommend that. Absolutely.
And as well as that, athletes are probably more comfortable asking those individuals the questions that they might think are silly questions, that they might ask a coach who wouldn't be in the know as well, or have that information. So, like, just getting them in as a sounding board for athletes can be beneficial too, I suppose, because a lot of the time they will know what they should be doing, but they're just unsure of it because they're just mulling it over in their head, and they need somebody to talk to about it and then affirm their beliefs, I suppose.
Yes. And so that's the crucial and more obvious side of it, right? But one thing, and you mentioned it already in this chat, language goes so far at that age, at underage, even in the older groups. Someone who is not educated in nutrition and how to work with individuals can just slip in language that it has more of an impact than they realize. Shit food, junk food, just things that even the individual, when they hear it, it doesn't impact them right away, but they ingrain it. And now when they're out and they're eating and they associate a certain meal as shit food, that carries larger consequences. Carrying a bit of extra weight, lofty, or things like that. Like Daniel, Evan, whoever else you get that's qualified will work with people, will talk to them, and they'll be careful with their language to make sure that that individual isn't taking it the wrong way. Let me give you an example with Daniel, because he is next level, and I don't think he'll mind me saying this, but I wrote a piece for him one time and we sent it out, and he came back to me and he was like, this is what he always did. How did you feel about the piece? And I'm like, pretty good. And he's like, yeah, I thought it was great. You said, thanks very much, you legend, at the end. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, do you see anything up about, or anything wrong about, he didn't say wrong, anything that could flag with the use of the word legend? And I was like, I thought about it. And he said, someone who hasn't really felt like they've been in a great place, if you say legend, it's almost widening that gap. It's almost showing them how far off they really are. They don't feel like a legend. They feel even worse. And he's like, it might not happen, but I just steer away from that very emotive categorizing language. And I was like, damn, you're fucking right. Like, so I was trying to just pump these guys. I was like, you legend. Like, you know what I mean? So
you're trying to connect.
Trying to connect. Yeah. But even these nuances are important, right? And I'm not saying like calling your athletes a legend is problematic, but it's language does. And I know you spoke about that with Daniel, and that's really what I learned working with him for the year, is it carries so much more weight than we think. Nutrition knowledge and science aside, the language you use is really important.
So then, to alter these mindsets or these classifications of food as bad, of weight as bad, shit, to use your own words, is it the language that you use, and what other strategies do you use to try to change athletes' mindsets around such maybe negative perceptions of certain foods or certain practices or certain habits, or even if it's just what a coach perceives to be the best shape they can be in?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because look, I'm someone who does post a lot about food shouldn't be good or bad. Look at it on a scale. Now, with that said, if I'm in a shop with my girlfriend, right, and we're down in the aisle, the very heavily processed aisle, you probably hear me say, I don't want this crap or something like that, right? Yeah. It's not like I go around and I just say, hey, I don't want this less optimal food, right? But that when you do,
you would have a girlfriend for very long.
yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I definitely wreck her head. So like, she'll pick up something, right? She'll look over at me and I'm just like, she puts it down. So we were thinking of making a video to show what it's like going out with a nutritionist. But when you are someone who looks at food with that good and bad flag, like you label foods as good and bad, when you do decide to consume the bad, it's what happens afterward that we're worried about. It's, you feel like you fell off. You feel like you're off track. You felt like, you know what I mean? You're now identifying yourself as someone who eats junk food. But if you look at the ingredients in foods, none of that food would be on our shelves. It's heavily regulated, right? There's nothing inherently bad or toxic about most food ingredients. Now, there's some caveats to that, right? Trans fats and things like that. But it's the dose that makes the poison. And it's diets that are heavy in those foods that will lead to an excess energy consumption, excess sodium, excess saturated fat, for sure. But in isolation, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's when we see people eat a lot of these foods and they are overweight, obese, very unhealthy, a lot of risk factors for several diseases, but it's because of the mass amount of that food that they consume. And it's not about having a bag of straight up potatoes. It doesn't have to be the baked ones. It doesn't have to be the low fat ones. It doesn't have to be the poppets. Potatoes, a bag of potatoes after your dinner of a pretty great eating day will have no consequence. It's 150 calories. It's the same as a teaspoon and a half of peanut butter, you know?
And that's probably where, at least in our culture, well, probably across the board, like people fall off, as you say, is the black or white thinking of food as good or bad, because they'll think, oh, well, I've eaten one chocolate bar, so I've already eaten something that's bad. So everything that I've done up to this point is irrelevant. And now I'll just gorge and binge on whatever I want because I failed, essentially. Yes. Whereas we should be appreciating it's not black or white, but we should be living in the gray, essentially, all the time.
All the time. But that comes with a bit more knowledge that, like, trying to get you'd be surprised. I think the biggest revelation that a lot of athletes have with me when they work with me is, so I'll give you an example with Clare. So my first real gig as a nutritionist was with Clare Footballers. Unbelievable team, like unbelievable lads, really, really focused on their nutrition when they started working with me. But there was a couple that, you know, the guys told me they like to enjoy themselves. And they were usually the better players, and they need to get down a small bit in their, you know, their body comp. And so I made a point of meeting everybody. And with these guys who did need to pursue a bit of a fat loss phase in their off season, I literally said to them, no lie, I said, with this plan, you can actually have a small chocolate bar every single day. And I could just see these kind of like these associations breaking in their brain. They're like, what? Yeah. No, it never actually transpires. They never want a chocolate bar every day. But when they view it as more of it's loose, it's flexible dieting, when they view it as that approach, you can adhere to that for 6 months, you know, as opposed to this very restrictive, clean, all good food diet for a couple of weeks. So definitely living in the gray is important.
And for a while, like these inter-county teams were focused on that clean, lean living, like everything natural, paleolithic, like probably when we were both in secondary school coming up, like that was what was preached, and like don't eat anything if it doesn't run, walk, swim, or whatever that analogy was. But like, it's just impractical. It's not the society that we live in anymore. Like, we have all these highly palatable foods that are accessible to us. So like, we are going to enjoy them at times as well. It's just being a little bit more rational around how we enjoy them, I suppose. But then obviously you have quite an interesting perspective to give us, because you have worked with both athletes in an Irish setting and an American setting. And I'm talking about society there and highly palatable foods. Obviously they're available to us in Ireland, but like in America, it's basically shoved down your throat. Like it's everywhere. So like, are there clear differences between working with athletes in those two settings, or is it pretty similar?
No, very clear differences. And I've not backed up. I've changed my tone slightly from what we've just talked about, because there are definitely times where it's like, it's shoved down your throat. When my girlfriend and I hopped on the plane from Costa Rica, you know, they have live TV on the little back TVs. Instantly, we're watching live TV because I was watching the Celtics game, right, on the plane. The ads, it's food. And it's all highly processed food. That's hard to step off a plane and not want the burger after watching 18 ads for a burger, right? You know what I'm saying? So,
because that's what the ads are built for. They're built to make you want the burger. There's a boardroom of people being like, how can we make people buy burgers here?
Exactly. There's nudging going on. There's environmental cues. So I actually do highlight a lot of that in my workshops with people. The things that are being pushed, like when you walk into a restaurant, packaging up a meal as a meal rather than the individual items, because you're more prone to think it's less calories, less food. So there's that regard, right? But the main difference I find, Peter, with working with the people here and the people in Ireland, when I'm in Ireland, this myth busting culture, right, that I've seen a lot of my peers abroad doing, I was like, come on, you're beating a dead horse here. Like, everybody knows it's about calories. Everybody knows you don't need protein after training. Why are you still talking about this shite? When you come over here, I swear to God, when I ask people for questions at the end of my workshops, do I need amino acids, BCAAs? Is fasting better than typical caloric? All the cliche questions come out. On social media, when I put a question box up, like it's my takeover day for Team Biolayne, I'll get those questions, because there's so much more misinformation out here in the States. And I think it's just because we're all more like, there's more connection, there's more commercially driven campaigns, there's a lot more people, and I don't know why, but I see why people do a lot more myth busting and just kind of evidence informed campaigns out here.
It's probably harder for practitioners to get the simple basic principles and dispel those myths, given that there's a larger population size. Because obviously, like in your past in Ireland, you've gone around to primary schools and preached to kids, or not preach, you've taught for basic principles and habits of nutrition. And like, theoretically, in a week, you could probably hit half the county in Ireland. Whereas like, if you were to attempt to do that in the States, you'd barely get through a couple of blocks of schools. Like, so it'd be impossible. Unless we can get you on a billboard in Times Square, it's going to be quite difficult, I suppose, to break down those barriers. So
no, you're dead right.
It is different. It's different. And that's why people with such a pull, or the social media kind of following of Layne, are so important to dispel those myths. Because equally in the States, like, and all over the world, you'll have somebody like Layne who has a following and he's dispelling myths, but then you'll also have somebody like, he's probably not going to listen to the podcast, but like somebody like Liver King on the other side. Do you know what I mean? So like, two very, very different messages being given to people, I suppose, and they don't know which one to believe if they're not in the know at all. And they'll probably be more attracted to Liver King sitting in an ice plunge pool with 4,000 blocks of ice or whatever it is, and they will Layne speaking to a camera.
Well, think about this. Think about someone who has a bunch of digestive issues. Maybe they have some skin issues, or maybe they have some joint, like, autoimmune problems. And this guy, Liver King, hits them right in the emotional kind of area that this solved. Or the other guy is Carnivore MD, who claims a lot of this, that all your kind of pain and your joint, pain or stomach issues will be cured if you go with just meat and fruit. And this guy is basically telling people, if you eliminate all foods from your diet except for one food, yes, of course, I can promise you that with several different types of diets. You know what I mean? Like the nuts only diet, the apples only diet, like the potatoes only diet, you'll get similar effects. That doesn't mean you're not losing out on a ton of different nutrients. So these guys really focus on the emotions, and they get people when they're at their worst, when they're really at their worst. And I've had some consultations with people since I've been on board, and I'm like, wow, they have tried everything, every type of diet. So you're absolutely right that, I think my friend always has to remind me of the guy I mentioned at the start, Colin. He always has to remind me that, so this information might seem redundant to you constantly coming up, but that's because you're following a bunch of the same people that do what you do. Think about someone who doesn't follow any nutrition profiles. This might be the first they're hearing of it. So that's important.
That's a great point, because you do sometimes, when you're thinking about putting content up, you do think, oh, well, somebody put up something similar to this last week. Like, is there really any point in me putting this up now? Are they going to think that I stole their idea? But like, we have to keep preaching the same things.
Fighting the fight.
And reframing things as well, to give it in a different perspective, or have it more easily digestible for people. There's another pun. Because some people are going to like the carousels. Some people are going to like the reels. Some people are going to like a little bit more information, like on a podcast. Everybody's going to have preferred methods of digesting the information and understanding it, I suppose, which is why it's important to ask yourself those questions when you are creating content. So like, when you are creating content, then do you have a particular content strategy, or do you just go off things that people might ask you on your consultations on a weekly, daily basis?
Yeah, so this might be a good tip for anyone who is trying to get into this space. So first off, what I do is I have a notes on my phone, and anytime I get a question that's I think people would want to know the answer to, or that challenges me any bit, I will put that down on my notes. And then I don't use this as much as I'd want to, but I have an online Excel that I have categories on, whether it's performance nutrition, like let's say myth busting, I actually don't have myth busting, I have common questions. It would be, I have probably a marketing column, and I don't know what the others are, but then, once a week I'll come in and I'll slot all these random, just kind of word vomited thoughts, post titles into the categories. And so that's kind of my process. So for years, I just sat there and would be like, okay, it's time to post something. Oh, what can I post about now? And it's like, okay, that's good, but do people actually want to know it? When I get a question, I got one yesterday on a consultation. It was, if I don't hit my protein, if I don't underconsume protein on a specific day, is there any point in trying to overconsume it the next day, or have I passed the point? And is it? And I was like, that's a fucking great question.
That is a great question.
I mean? Yeah. So, and the answer to that is really not really, because protein, we kind of say we don't store it very well. You know what I mean? So you're trying to end the day on a net positive. And if you don't, it's kind of like you've lost that battle onto the next one, instead of trying to overcompensate and fill yourself up. But I digress. So in that way, I know it's a proven content strategy that I know I'm going to get interaction on that. And that helps because I know they're topical questions. People actually want to know these things. Whereas if I just put my social media content based on what I think people want to know, I'm going to be largely off, you know?
There's parallels between that and your delivery of maybe workshops too, especially your work with tactical athletes and your workshops there, which I know you wanted to get into. But often when you're sitting down with them or presenting to them, it's often a conversation around their habits and then treating their kind of specific scenarios rather than you getting up and just giving a presentation that you've prepared in advance, which is similar to your social media strategy in a way. Yeah. So I was just talking about this as well. One thing that has been of massive benefit to me in my speaking, and I will say the best thing I do in terms of my career is probably my speaking. Like I do connect with audiences. I don't get nervous that much as I did anymore. It's my anxiety, right? It's my anxiety. I can be in front of a group, and if I see someone lean over to someone, or if I see someone falling asleep, I instantly adjust. I instantly adapt. And that's huge because I'm tailoring it based on the people that what they want to see and what's not working. Usually it's me just being over anxious and this person just had a whole day of stuff and he has no interest in nutrition, or the two are talking about how good this is, you know? So it proves me, or it serves me well, but sometimes it obviously can bite me in the ass. But absolutely, that's exactly what I try to incorporate. At the start of each of my workshops, I say, guys, I have 60 slides here. I want to get through half of them, if even. I want this to be, just like you said today, I want it to be a chat. Yeah. You know, and they bring up their questions then. So for those listeners that wouldn't be familiar with your work with tactical athletes, they're probably saying, what the hell is a tactical athlete? Is a deep holding midfielder, or what's the story like? And what do you do with them? So like, if you could explain to us what a tactical athlete is, what you're doing with them, and how that differs from the work that you do, with team sport athletes, or maybe endurance athletes, or athletes in a sporting setting. Yeah. So tactical athlete, I guess in a way it is a misleading term, but it's basically anyone that's in the front line, whether that's police, firefighter, where their job is like to protect and serve. Military, Navy, also medics, although I haven't worked with a huge amount of those, or, you know, ambulance, paramedics, who else? Like government agencies, things like that. So anyone who their job is to protect and serve, and performance is a massive part of that. Like it's such a huge part of that. You know what I mean? So an example I always give is, you might have 10 years here in Boston or New York, you might have 10 years of a quiet, you're in a very quiet precinct, not a huge amount of action. You don't see a lot of fires, but God forbid a tower gets hit and you have to climb 60 flights of stairs and get back down with people on your shoulders. So how the hell are you not an athlete? You know what I mean? And then I always say, this gets a good laugh from them. You know, I've worked with elite athletes, and in a lot of ways, you guys are very similar to elite athletes. Maybe in some ways you're not, and you get a few laughs there, but time availability and performance being the key, and then just not having the resources to count their macros or track their food or weigh their food. They don't have time for that. They need
simple, plain, easy strategies. And so, man, I absolutely love that work. It's crazy how much they learn in one workshop, because of, like, I have people come up to me and just say, this has completely flipped everything I thought nutrition was on its head. Really, really, because it's my way of giving back to them. You know, a lot of these guys, they fight fires, they save people's lives, and they really don't take care of their own bodies. You know, they're just this vessel that they feel like it doesn't deserve that attention.
Absolutely. It must be incredibly rewarding for you to help them out, as is their job for them. Does a lot of what you do with them relate back to, because of the time pressures around preparation and then functioning optimally or working optimally in a stressful environment, and how to fuel effectively to do that?
Yes. Yeah. And it's doing what they can for that. It's not losing sleep over what they can't. So twice a month, I actually travel down to Rhode Island, which is south of us. Yes, south of us. And I do a workshop with Navy ship commanders. So these are guys who are being trained to be in second or first in command of 250-man warships. And so they're out at sea for 3 weeks at a time, and they have these meal plans. And it starts where they have fresh fruit, fresh veg, good food. And then by the end of it, it's pretty much whatever they can preserve for that long. And so I'm not saying, guys, you have to eat very clean. You have to eat, you know, organic or whole, fresh fruit and veg. It's about, when you go to the canteen and you see the buffet, getting the lean meat without the breading on it, or without the heavy fried, you know, batter on it. Getting frozen vegetables, that's okay. Getting the piece of fruit, getting a granola bar instead of the donut. Doing what you can and not losing sleep over what you can't.
I would imagine in that setting, like, it's obviously a highly stressful job. Like, would they get a huge amount of rest or downtime or sleep? Like, I would imagine that a lot of them would be supplementing with caffeine on a daily basis. So is that a big talking point for you? Not taking actual caffeine supplements, but they'd be drinking a lot of coffee, probably mainly coffee, not tea, over in the States.
Yeah. And to be honest, when that slide comes up, it's probably the most interested, like, they get the most interested next to alcohol. A lot of them want to know a lot about alcohol, because, you know, it's definitely a coping mechanism for a lot of tactical athletes. But caffeine is definitely overconsumed in these circles. Absolutely. We say the safe limit is about 400 milligrams a day, which is equivalent to, depending on the roast, depending on where you're getting it, 3 to 4 medium, like, small cups of coffee, right? When I say that's the safe limit per day, that doesn't mean if you get more than that on one day, it's gonna kill you or anything.
It's not like the bananas myth that went around primary school when we were younger, that if you ate 8 bananas, you'd die of overdose.
No. So it's it's not that if you consume that a couple of days, it's going to give you a heart attack or anything like that. It's if you do that routinely across a period of several years, you're raising your blood pressure, your heart rate, your stress levels constantly, to the point that, that long-term exposure, again, it's a dose that makes the poison. But what I try to do is, I don't like, this is a coffee right here. I drink coffee. I'm definitely reliant on it. It's about not consuming it when you really don't need it. So a lot of these guys have to wake up. Think of firefighters, they have to wake up in the middle of the night. A lot of them will just grab a coffee for the sake of it, even though, you know, a lot of firefighters have these routine medical calls. They go to the house, they check on the person, it's fine. Maybe they fell off their bed and they're kind of wedged. They help them up, they're back to the station. So I'm not saying get 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. I'm saying don't have a cup of coffee then, because that's going to impact your sleep. Then other things like, you know, cutting it off at 3, the cliche, because the half-life does stay around. And we have sleep experts that work with that company as well. And they kill it with the caffeine information they give. You know what I mean? Cycling on and off can be a good one for, let's say you're drinking it for a period of a couple of months continuously. You're pushing the limits of how much you need to get that stimulatory effect. And although the research is hazy there, but just taking a week or two off can kind of resynthesize and put you back to a baseline where a small cup does you well again, you know?
It's a great point.
Yeah. Just kind of bringing that back to baseline, because you can keep pushing the limit for that. And measuring. So when I was doing my thesis in Ireland, I actually don't have them anymore, but I started getting heart palpitations. It was the stress. It was just a lot of stress I had. I was doing it remotely. I was playing basketball, traveling Limerick to Tralee 4 days a week. And I was brewing a pot of
Which
coffee.
is very, for the Dublin listeners, Limerick to Tralee is very far. You think everywhere outside the country is right beside each other. It's not close.
Yeah. An hour and a half. So 3 hours a night. 3 hours a night. I'd go down for training, back up 4 days a week. And I would brew a pot of coffee in the morning, Peter, and I would just keep filling up the cup. No idea how many cups I'm drinking. So one tip I give people is just measure it. Just do it in cupfuls. Don't brew that pot and keep pouring it in, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I could go on about that all day.
And I was just about to say as well, though, like, it's a habit. So people get into the habit of having a certain amount of coffees per day. And it's probably, for those firefighters, it's probably part of their mental preparation for getting ready to do the job as well. So like, they're trying, like, as you just said, you and I are both reliant on caffeine. Like, so it probably would be more advantageous to not be reliant on it. So breaking those habits every once in a while is definitely a healthy thing to do.
Yeah. And I'll really quick, and I won't keep you long here, but what I say to people is when you take that first sip of coffee, that's when when you get that really stimulatory effect. For me, when I take that first sip of coffee, but there's no way the caffeine has had any physiological impact. So it's the connection there. It's that mental association that coffee is going to give you the stimulation. And it's beer, right? Same thing with beer. When I take that first sip of a beer, I get that, have a non-alcoholic. Keep the cue without, just change the substance. And okay, it's not going to give you the same. You're still, a decaf coffee isn't going to give you the same, or something like a Diet Coke or a Spritz or whatever, but it will give you that sensation or that habit. It will fulfill that.
Like, that's just golden. It's golden information, really. Like,
and it works.
And it does work. Like, if I'm like feeling just absolutely floored, and I know I have a heavy leg session in the gym coming or something, I'll be like, right, I'll drop in, I'll get a coffee. And I know that that's not going to be absorbed for the next hour, but the coffee still impacts like positively on my training session, which is taking place far before that caffeine even enters my system. So it's a placebo effect, but as we always say,
and that's the most widely observed effect in science.
Yeah.
If there was a substance that gave us the effect of a placebo, it would be the most widely sold one.
Absolutely. Exactly what I was going to say. So quick fire questions to finish. Proudest achievement to date is first.
Proudest achievement to date. Jesus. Okay, so my first time working with this company that I do the workshops for, I was supposed to be shadowing. I was supposed to do a couple of weeks of shadowing just to go to these workshops and see how they go. And I got a call one night. I was supposed to go shadow this workshop, and I got a call, and they were like, our nutritionist couldn't make it in. Can you get down to Rhode Island tomorrow morning? We'll get you. It was like 11 at night. And I was like, okay. So I got down there and didn't even look at the slides till the next morning. It's a room full of, it's still one of the bigger talks I've ever done. It's a room full of these commanders. And I swear I only looked at the slides for a 3-hour workshop. A 3-hour workshop is no joke. Like, you're talking for 3 straight hours. You need to know what you're talking about. And I don't know, I killed it, because I came out, I said I was Irish. They got a good laugh out of that, made some jokes about the alcohol slides, you know, just connected with them, non-judgmental, didn't condemn anything they did already, answer their questions. And, you know, the founder was there. The guy who ran the base, who was like top in command, came down and was like, that was phenomenal. And I think that was my biggest one, because I was completely unprepared. I was completely unprepared, and I didn't have anything to lose because they got me last minute. And I was proud of that.
winging it can always go better than you think it's going to go.
Yeah.
Like, you can do some of the best work that you'll ever do when you're winging it.
Yeah.
So next question, which will probably be throwing it back to the basketball. Maybe not. Favorite athlete of all time?
It's going to go against what I was saying earlier, but I do love Luka Doncic because he gives hope to someone like me. You know, I'm playing in a league now here in Boston, and I'm not short. I'm 6'2", 6'3", right? But compared to the guys I'm playing with, I'm on the smaller side, not very muscular, athletic. And yeah, I play that kind of crafty game where I can pass, I can go to the basket and stuff. And he's not physically anywhere near any of the NBA players, yet he's absolutely killing them. So I think he's my favorite.
But that's the important for athletes of doubling down on your strengths. Like, you can iron out your weaknesses, but make your strengths even stronger. You'll be a better athlete and you'll be better for your team. So like, if he's perfected the skill of the step back and that quick release, like, just keep doing that and nobody can figure out how to stop you. But obviously, if you have nothing else to your game and you do come up against somebody that does know how to stop you, maybe Patrick Beverley's getting up in his face or whatever, just won't.
Jeez, okay. I didn't know you knew the NBA like this. Okay.
You've got to have something else to your game.
For sure.
So work on your weaknesses, but don't forget about your strengths as well, would be my advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any artists you've been listening to a lot recently?
Zero. I literally had no headphones. My girlfriend's been putting on Drake's new album. She loves it, so I listened to that. I know he's getting a lot of stick for it, but I do enjoy that kind of alternative approach, I suppose. But to be honest, man, my music tastes are 2010 hits. It's pretty sad. And
that's not sad. That's good. Get a bit of Neo, get a bit of Jason Derulo, Usher in there.
Yeah, that's me, man. That's what gets me hyped. I'm not gonna lie.
There you go. To be fair, Drake's he's in the middle. I think some people are loving it, some people aren't. I thought the second half of it was decent. The trouble is most people that are listening to it aren't getting as far as the second half.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the trouble. Interesting one for a nutritionist. Meals you've been loving lately. Did you pick up anything in Costa Rica?
Oh, I did. Yeah, absolutely. So basically they have this plate called casado, and I think it just means like the typical plate, right? So I suppose it would be the Irish breakfast maybe, right? But they have it in every restaurant. You could get it at any meal of the day. And it's a piece of fish, usually mahi-mahi. Oh, nice. Just grilled, right? Or sometimes it's pan fried, but it's no batter, nothing else with it. Just some lemon on the side, plantains. So like, the banana is kind of fried. It's either rice or it's just plain white rice, not brown rice. I asked for brown rice at every place. People didn't even know what I meant. And veggies. And it's just that. Oh, and beans. And like, you go to one of the areas that are the least developed, right? All right, it's not the least developed. It's not a purely third world country, but it is considered underdeveloped. And you see the plate and they're hitting all the boxes. They're getting the essential fatty acids, the protein with the fish. They're getting their, some plantains. They're getting the veggies. They're getting fiber in the kidney beans, and they're getting their carbohydrates in the rice. And it's delicious. And it was like $5.
And it's probably very hard to do wrong as well, because it's the same across the board.
So easy. So pretty much we ate that. Whenever we cooked at home, we ate that. We would get a big bag of tilapia, which is the main fish out there as well. Mahi-mahi was a bit more expensive. That was delicious. But to be honest, I haven't cooked properly in a couple of weeks. I haven't been able to. I've literally been, in the past month, we were in Costa Rica, Mexico. I've been to Montana. I've been to Florida to meet Layne's crew. And now I'm finally back here. All right, we don't even have a fridge yet. So look, beef jerky.
This
is from like a wholesale place. I have some apples. I have some Quest bars. Like, I'm not losing sleep over what I'm not getting. I accept that I can't get everything in, but this is just a period of transition for me.
Absolutely. So with all that time traveling or spent traveling, have you had a chance to read any books, or has it been simply research studies and brushing up on things or catching up on work?
Yeah, it's mostly catching up on work, reading a lot of Layne stuff just to kind of get into the, I'm doing a couple of online courses out here too. So that's pretty much taken the majority of my time. I did get this book from Malcolm Gladwell, which I'm excited to read. It's his new one. It's called The Bomber Mafia. I'm excited to read that. You'd swear I'm prepped for this podcast with everything in the back.
It's just, that's the setting that you're in the house. Everything is behind you.
It's all around me. It's all around me. And then I have started Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty, which has been enjoyable to start. I haven't given it any proper time yet, but I do want to finish that. And then I will give a little pump to what Layne has given for free. It's his reading research guide. So highly recommend that. It's for free. It's 20 pages worth of, it's a guide that basically tells you how to read research studies. And I know that was something you were going to talk about. Is this was built over years and years and years. And it basically shows you how to go to a research study and kind of critically appraise it, not to lose too much time over it, right? We're not telling everyone to be research appraisers, right? It's not what we expect, but being able to see the difference between a mechanistic trial in rodents versus a human, like double-blind placebo-controlled trial, which is really beneficial.
Yeah, and like hugely beneficial. And I'll be honest, like, I am so lazy with research studies. Like, I am abstract results, conclusion, skip all the rest of it. I'm not reading it. I just always have hated it. So like, if I get, like, if that's the easiest way for me to do it, but there's an easier way to get better information and cover the whole thing and compare it to other studies, then obviously that's going to be useful. So hopefully people use that.
But for that, I don't say don't try to fit a square peg into a circle hole, right? Go to trusted sources that do that for you. Examine.com. Layne is a good one. He does that for you. Just follow him on social media and you'll get free research breakdowns. You'll get 2 or 3 a week. Alan Aragon has a research review. Go to people gives that information out instead of saying I'm not going to do it, because you know what I'm saying. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, or forcing yourself to do something that you don't enjoy.
I remember before I went to college, even like looking at Layne's feed and everything he was putting out there, and even when I was in college, and just asking myself, how is this lad reading so many research studies? Like, if I'm lucky, I can get through 3 in a day.
Man, being out with them though, I like these guys, him and Holly, they are work. Like they work. They're dogs. Like they work. Like even when we're at lunch, they're talking, like they have meetings and stuff they have to do, and they put the work in, and he's just next level, man. Right? The way he breaks down research, it's next level. It really is.
Okay, so what is the biggest thing that you've learned in the last 12 months?
Ooh, I actually didn't prepare any of these. I was too busy looking at the other things. The biggest thing I've learned. So I took a lot away from Costa Rica in terms of the relaxed lifestyle. So I find in developed countries, we get convinced that we need a lot more than we really do. We get convinced that we have to tick a certain amount of boxes in life. Get a house, get a car, get kids, get a solid job. I'm not saying those things are important, but it's like we talked about nutrition. It's completely individual, and you can't be forced into these things just because that's what society tells you to do. I'll link you a song, and I actually want you to put this in the show notes, and it's by who's the guy who sings Took a Pill in Ibiza? Mike Posner.
Yeah.
So he's just doing a live acoustic version of I Took a Pill in Ibiza, and he just talks about he lost his dad recently, and he had this big long list of things he wanted to do before like after he did all his career and he wanted to do it with his dad, and then his dad passed, and he realized like it's the noise around us that makes us think we have to have all these possessions, all these things in place. Do them now. You know what I mean? Like reduce all the noise, keep life simple. It only adds stress. And so trying to do that for sure.
So then what would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Oh, fuck. These are great questions. My 18-year-old self, I would tell him to go and get a registered dietitian qualification, because that's biting me in the ass now. But other than that, I would say stop striving to be in certain groups, to be a certain type of person. Just like, okay, that's so cliche, but literally do what you want to do and wear it as a badge of honor, because that will serve you as like a benefit in your later life, rather than something that casts you out in a trivial 4 or 5 year period in school. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like be unique and be proud of that.
100%. Pat, thanks a million for that. Fantastic conversation. Loads of nutrition, loads of information for people there, be they an athlete, general population, a member of those services you were talking about earlier, or an aspiring nutritionist, or just somebody that's interested. So best of luck, whatever travels you're going on next, but I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Of course. And if people are listening to this and they want more information about pursuing nutrition as a career, please reach out to me. I'll help you. I'll give you some insights into what you have to do in different countries. But yeah, thank you for having me on. Great interviewer. Although I know you don't like that term, but you are.
Thanks a million, mate. Appreciate it.
Of course.